children. I am Aldrie Henry Lee, University Director, Sir Arthur Lewis Institute of Social and Economic Studies, and I will guide the proceedings this evening. Please note that the session is being recorded and will be made available afterwards. Ladies and gentlemen, children, parents, and children, there is no doubt that the nation's children are at risk of violence in private and public spaces. Jamaica ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child in 1991 and promised to protect and adequately provide for all our children. Yet every day there are reports of abuse against our children in homes, in schools, communities, everywhere. Too many are sexually, physically, and emotionally battered and even murdered. The National Children's Registry reports that there were approximately 90,000 cases of child abuse between 2013 and 2019. A May 16, 2021 article in the Jamaica Observer revealed that Dr. Elizabeth Ward, Chairman, Violence Prevention Alliance, reported that 20% of persons with violence-related injuries are under the age of 20. Too many individuals aged 0 to 17 years experience violence, abuse, or neglect. Too many children are witnessing violence in the home or the community, and we know that there are direct and indirect effects of child abuse. Adverse children experiences are linked to mental illness, chronic health problems, and substance abuse in adulthood. Anyway, we have a panel of experts with us to discuss child abuse, so I will not prolong my introduction. Our panelists consist of Dr. Karen Carpenter, Dr. Mrs. Ann Blaine, Mrs. Rosalee Gage-Grey, and Director of Public Prosecutions, Paula Llewellyn, CDQC. We cannot speak about children and young people without involving them, so I'm acknowledging two young men who will also contribute to this forum. We have with us Mr. Nathan Walker, head boy, Campion College, and Mr. DeShaun Bradford, deputy head boy, Campion College. They will introduce the panelists and also move the vote of thanks. So to introduce our esteemed panelists this evening, I call on Mr. Nathan Walker, head boy, Campion College, to do the honors. Over to you, Mr. Walker.
Thank you so much, Professor. Good evening, ladies, gentlemen, and children. I am Nathan Walker, the head boy of Campion College, and it is my pleasure to introduce the panelists for this forum entitled Sexually, Physically, and Emotionally Battered. Will our children ever be safe? I would first like to present to you Mrs. Betty Ann Blaine. Mrs. Betty Ann Blaine is a leading advocate and activist for the welfare of children and their families and for the eradication of poverty. Her body of work also includes over 30 years as an academic and a developmental specialist, provision of dynamic leadership in the Jamaican NGO community, and in the call for honesty and transparency in national affairs. She is the founder of the two leading children's organizations in Jamaica, Youth Opportunities Unlimited and Hear the Children's Cry. Her decades of advocacy have included hosting and co-hosting two morning radio talk shows and penning two newspaper columns, each over a period of many years. She has also contributed a wide range of voluntary efforts, including the recent founding of the national advocacy group Citizens United to Reduce Electricity, or CURE, for fairer electricity fees. Mrs. Blaine is a former university lecturer and leader in the Jamaican anti-apartheid movement and a spokesperson on Black history in Africa and diaspora. She continues to work in both the print and electronic media to inform, educate, and engage in national dialogue on issues and concerns to citizens. Following, we have Dr. Karen Carpenter. Dr. Carpenter is the head of the Institute for Gender and Developmental Studies, the unit. She is a Florida board certified clinical sexologist with a PhD in educational psychology and the director of the CSRG Sexology Clinic at the University Hospital of the West Indies. She is the editor of Interweaving Tapestries of Sexuality and Culture, author of Love and Sex, The Basics and Questioning Caribbean Jewish Identity, and co-author of Language, Race, and the Global Jamaican. Dr. Carpenter is the host of Love and Sex on Facebook and YouTube. Her research interests include human sexuality, gender and interpersonal relationships, and psycholinguistics. Next, we have Mrs. Rosalee Gage-Grey. A senior executive with over 25 years experience, she began her career in the public service in 1987 in the Income Tax Department. Since 2003, she has held the position of Director of Human Resource and Administration at the Child Development Agency, CDA, now the Child Protection and Family Services Agency, CPFSA, where she has led the agency's island-wide staff recruitment, development, and guided human resource policy, and provided oversight for operational matters. In March 2014, Mrs. Gage-Grey was appointed CEO CPFSA. She has since been providing strategic leadership and direction to the executive management team and the agency's 600 staff members, and providing policy advice to government on matters related to child welfare and protection. Her extensive background in human resource policies and transformational leadership helped orchestrate the transformation of the Child Protective Services. She is a board member with the Early Childhood Commission, ECC, and the National Parenting Support Commission, NPSC, and elder at the Trinity Moravian Church. Lastly, but certainly not least, is Miss Paula Llewellyn, CDQC. Miss Paula Llewellyn is the director of Miss Paula Llewellyn is the Director of Public Prosecutions in Jamaica. She is the first woman to be appointed to that position. She studied law and has served previously as Clerk of Court in the St. James Resident Magistrate Court, Crown Counsel, and Deputy Director of Public Prosecutions. She was also the first woman to act in the position of Director and Senior Deputy Director of Public Prosecution. In May 2008, Miss Llewellyn was appointed as Her Majesty's Queen Counsel with the Order of Distinction conferred with the rank of Commander in August of that same year. She was also the recipient of the Civil Service Long Service Medal for 25 years in the public service. DPP Llewellyn is of the view that professionalism and excellence must be at the heart of the service to her fellow citizens. I am pleased that these ladies have agreed to present on this panel as we examine child abuse in Jamaica. Speaking on behalf of Jamaican children, I believe this discussion is extremely necessary since child abuse has been a perpetual phenomenon that is staining our Jamaican society. Please let us stop abusing the nation's children. I look forward to learning from this set of illustrious panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nathan Walker, head boy, Campion College. And we are going to start with one of our, yes, let me put on my video. I'm told I haven't on my video. Yes, so thank you very much, Mr. Nathan Walker, for that excellent introduction. And we are going to start with our esteemed panel. And I call upon Dr. Karen Carpenter to begin this great discussion that we have all been waiting for. Over to you, Dr. Carpenter.
Remember to unmute, please.
You're on mute.
Today I want to share in this panel from two perspectives, and the two perspectives are the ones mentioned in the introduction. I have the fortune of being in a dual capacity, in a clinical capacity as a director of the Sexology Clinic at the University Hospital of the West Indies, the Caribbean Sexuality Research Group Clinic, where we see the public free of cost and have done so for almost 11 years. It's our 11th year taking in clients from the public. Secondly, as the head of the Institute for Gender and Development Studies. So I am concerned about the issue of child abuse, not only from a clinical perspective, but from the perspective of how our children and women, as a gender specialist, are experiencing these abuses. And I might also add how our boys and men are also experiencing these abuses, because gender is about everyone. I want to start by looking at the three facets that were mentioned in the topic of the theme of the panel tonight. And generally we speak of things such as sexual abuse, physical abuse, and emotional abuse from a sort of unifocal perspective. I'm going to look at the cultural context and what long-term effects it's having on us as a society. When we think of sexual abuse, we tend to think of a male perpetrator and a female victim. I would love for us to be able to widen that perspective to include male on male, both perpetrator and victim, and female on male, perpetrator and victim. We rarely speak about those other two categories. What happens to our children when a male child is abused by a male member of society, and what happens to our children when our male child is abused by our female members of our society. And I am saying that specifically. I will elaborate on that as we come to why I'm pointing out those things. When we think of physical abuse, again, we think of beatings. And we tend to think of a child being beaten, an arbitrary child. We don't think of gender when we think of the child being beaten. But we know that our boy children are receiving harsher punishment, physical punishment, brutal punishment at the hands of both fathers and mothers, male and female members of their families. We must pay close attention to that boy child who is being physically abused by a female member of the family. This has repercussions culturally, and it has implications for the long-term effects of abuse. The other thing that we do not think of very often when we think of abuse of the physical nature is beyond the beatings. We do not think of things like burning. We do not think of things that the child is being in some way physically oppressed, children being locked indoors, left alone. These are all physical types of abuse. When we think of emotional abuse, we think of verbal degradation. We think of someone saying unkind things to a child. But there's more to emotional abuse than that. Yes, negative comparisons are the first thing we think of, but I'd like us to also consider neglect. Child neglect is emotional abuse and sometimes includes physical abuse. Deprivation is emotional abuse, depriving a child of the necessary love, affection, and positive reinforcement is a form of abuse. And of course, child shifting, which may seem like a harmless matter, but when the child is shifted and the age at which they are at when they're shifted is quite important. I can't tell you the number of male persons I've spoken to who felt that the female members of the family were shifted into situations that were better, more salubrious, and the boys in the family had to rough it out and tough it out and leave school. These have implications for the long-term effects of child abuse. So the reason I raise these issues that relate to young men and young boys as it relates to a gendered perspective is abusers very often were themselves abused. We learn to abuse by being abused ourselves or watching someone abuse another person. So when we have that supposed disciplinary action by mother, by female member of family against a boy child, and it is a harmful action, a physically harmful action, emotionally harmful action, it shows up in relationships. We do see it in the clinic in the relationships. Okay, so sexual abuse, we tend to think of some strange person outside of the home sexually abusing a female child. That's not the case. Quite a bit of sexual abuse that we encounter clinically has to do with filial abuse, meaning brothers and sisters, near relatives, and familial abuse, meaning fathers or stepfathers and girl children, fathers or stepfathers and boy children, and mothers. Yes, it's shameful. We don't like to talk about it. Mothers and other female members of the family and boy children. Many Jamaican boys are initiated into sexual activity unwillingly through forced sex at an age when they're not able to comprehend what sexuality is. And later we see them having trouble in their relationships when they've committed to another individual. And they rarely speak about these things with their partners. The persons that speak to these things about, the persons that speak with about these things are pastors and counselors and psychologists. But it has a long-term negative effect on relationship when young boys are initiated without their consent and before they're able to grapple with sexuality. In our culture, we want to big them up and we laud that and we say, oh, you're taking big woman now. And these are some of the cultural mores that we must change. Fortunately, we have made some advances. And I think that too often when we speak about these issues, we do not look at the advances. Mrs. Rosalee Gage-Grey is one of the very palpable examples of advances that we've made. I was going to mention the Child Protection Act, which has helped to define the ways in which children are abused and therefore give us a benchmark for addressing those abuses. That was a major step in the right direction for our country. And I know as we speak that there's other legislation, or at least 4 pieces of legislation that are under review that will strengthen the ways in which we protect women and girls, boys and men within that sexual, physical, and emotional sphere. When we think about the Parenting Commission, we can think of some of the advances that we've made for better parenting, but often we're preaching to the choir and we're not reaching enough people with that public service message that says that beating a child, pummeling a child is not actually discipline. We have to reinvest in that kind of campaign. And of course, for emotional cases of emotional abuse, we have the child guidance clinics in the various hospitals around the country. They are understaffed, but at least they exist. So we have made some strides. What of the future? How do we look at the long-term cultural context and what we can do to address what we see now, this scourge of abuses? How can we redress that? I would say that we have 3 things that we need to do. First of all, we have to admit the reality and the science of human sexuality. We cannot continue to pretend that sex is not a normal part of growing up and development. We have to teach young people the truth about their bodies, the truth about the pleasures of sex, and the truth about the responsibilities for those pleasures. So comprehensive sexuality education is a must. We must begin to look at what is normal, if we like, practice within sexual growth and development. What is going to happen naturally, biologically, and by normal there I mean natural. We must assess the psychological and mental health issues that relate to these abuses. And by this, I don't just mean the victims of the abuse or survivors of the abuse. We must assess the psychological well-being of the perpetrators. And we cannot only incarcerate people and give them sentences for the ills that they've committed. We have to address their mental health state. Otherwise, we are simply having them released into the society again to commit the same errors once more. And they themselves are often victims of abuse. Thirdly, we must address the issue by providing adequate training, in-time training, behavior change training for both victims and survivors and perpetrators. We must address the perpetrators in the society. As unpleasant as it is to think about it, we must address the pedophile. We must address the woman beater, child beater, the parent who's abusing the child physically. We must address the perpetrator, and we must do so from a psychological perspective as well as a criminal law perspective. It is not enough to incarcerate people. We are incarcerating illnesses and not treating them. And then we must have periodic evaluations. Recently, there has been a call for child abusers registry. And while a registry is a good thing to have, it is not enough to know who is and where they are the persons perpetrating sexual abuses. we must also provide means by which they can redress their behavior. And if it cannot be redressed, we must take further steps. We must have benchmarks for what we call a civilized and safe society for children. Otherwise, we'll never know when we get there. We have nothing to measure it by, and we keep making lofty goals about where we will get to in 2030 without saying how we're going to get there. And that's why this is an important panel. And I thank you for listening.
Wow. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Karen Carpenter. I have so many comments and questions myself, but I'm inviting the audience. Please use the Q&A or put it in the chat if you're on YouTube. Welcome to all of you participants. We have had an excellent beginning to this panel. Looking at the gender dimensions of abuse, the abuse becomes the abuser. And I like that statement about incarcerating illnesses and not treating them. And your forward thinking was excellent and quite we out of the box, which is what we want. We want something revolutionary. We want something radical that we can transform the society. So I'm excited about this panel. I have comments and I want to see the questions and questions coming in the Q&A. And please, those of you across the Caribbean, I'm told that we have people from Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, wherever you are, welcome, and please stay tuned. So now we are going to turn to, somebody says, I'm appreciating the statement, the abuse becomes the abuser. So now we turn to Mrs. Betty Ann Blaine, and we know that we're going to have an excellent presentation. Over to you, Mrs. Betty Ann Blaine.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Professor. Thank you very much. And good afternoon to everyone with us everywhere, all over the Caribbean, I hear. It's really nice. It's a pleasure to be in your company. And thanks to you at UE for hosting this forum. And of course, for inviting me to participate. Now, it's still Child Month. So I'll be the last day, but that's okay. It's still Child Month. So I want to say before I start, Happy Child Month to all of our children. And, you know, not just Jamaican children, children across the region. And to the children, parents, and family members with us this afternoon. Is it still afternoon? It is. May God bless you and your families continually. Now, I see that my colleague, Rosalee Gage-Grey from CPFSA, will be presenting statistics and focusing on child abuse generally in Jamaica. So I thought I would talk a little bit about the work that we're doing at Hear the Children's Cry, particularly regarding missing children here in our country. So let me say that Hear the Children's Cry has been around for a long time. We'll be 20 years old next year. But we began paying very close attention to the problem of missing children 12 years ago. That was in 2009. Now, the catalyst for that was the abduction and murder of 11-year-old Ananda Dean, after whom, as you know, the Ananda Alert is named, who was a child in my own home-based Sunday school program. So I knew the child personally. I knew her family members as well. Here the Children's Cry gave name to the Ananda Alert and helped with its formation and establishment, and almost immediately began researching, documenting, and disseminating information on missing children in Jamaica. Now, in those early days, I'm talking 2009, we realized that the problem, there was a burgeoning problem, and it was growing, this problem of missing children. And so we began to gather information. And in 2009, we gathered the information manually. With the invitation and cooperation of the police, the JCF, we began gathering data at CCN headquarters. And that work involved one of our volunteers going every week to Old Hope Road to document the cases. It's interesting because in 2009, the information coming into CCN from police stations across Jamaica, the information was written and delivered by hand on carbonated pieces of paper. And so our volunteer would go every week and would have to go through these pieces of paper. And because the reports were handwritten from different police stations, we encountered problems deciphering sometimes the information, which meant that what we did was that we then had to make phone calls to the police stations for the correct information. But that was 2009 when we first started doing this work. There were no photographs at that time either, and that's important to say. That would start afterwards, having photographs of children who go missing. So we began tracking the numbers vis-a-vis missing children from 2009, as I said before. And I want to just quickly just read through for you the last 12 years, just the totals of the numbers of reports of missing children in Jamaica. 2009, when we started that year, at the end of the year, there were 1,770 reports. The following year, 2010, 1,693 in 2011, 2,126 in 2012, 2,079 children. All of these kids reported missing. These are annual figures: 2013, 2,206, 2014, 1,984, 2015, 1,941. And those numbers remain constant, essentially, it remained constant for the past 12 years. That's up until 2020, of course, last year. And we only have figures right now for 2 months of this year, January and February. So far, we have 173 reports. And I want to say something, I hope I remember before I finish, about why we think the numbers have dropped so dramatically. We're happy to know if it is actually correct and factual that fewer children are going missing, but we're not sure. So the numbers have been, as you can see, well over 1,000, sometimes over 2,000 at the end of every year. So over the 12 years that we've been tracking this problem, there have been over 20,000 reports of missing children in Jamaica. Now, I want to just give you 2 other pieces of this, 2 other sets of statistics that are important. Most of the children who go missing return home. I think it is something like maybe 10, maybe 15% every month of children that are unaccounted for. So over the 12 years again, there were 3,236 outstanding cases. Now, these are children that are reported at the time unaccounted for, outstanding cases. What is important, and I'm hoping we can get the resources, the government can do this, is that we need to begin to look at some of these long-term cases to see whether those children actually returned and what has happened to them. But those 3,236 outstanding over the period. And then the other statistic that is quite depressing is that, again, over the period, I'm talking 12 years, 82 children who had been reported missing were murdered. And so I thought I'd share those with you. And we've been tracking this, we continue to do this. So there are 2 other things I want to mention. Most of the children going missing are females, but we do have boys, of course, who go missing. And the ages typically, largely speaking, are somewhere between 13 and 17 years. Most of them go missing from the parishes of Kingston, St. Andrew, and St. Catherine. But there are reports now of children going missing from every single parish. Now, it's interesting, when we started in 2009, there were 1 or 2 eastern parishes where we weren't getting reports, but now there are reports from every single parish. Okay, let me just say that most of the children reported missing in Jamaica are in fact runaways. And as you would expect, there are both push and pull factors. Now, the push factors are, and Dr. Carpenter mentioned some of the problems, you know, of abuse and so on. The push factors are abuse of various kinds, physical, sexual, emotional, which would include verbal. And, you know, the children tell us, you know, and we try to tell parents, do not curse the children the way you do, using the worst kinds of expletives and degrading them in the worst way, because the children tell us that sometimes they leave because of that kind of abuse. So we've got to pay attention to that, those of us who are working with parents, you know. So push factors, abuse of various kinds, ongoing and unresolved conflicts in the home with parents, guardians, quarrels, disagreements. A lot of that will push children out of the homes. Poverty and deprivation. We had a Zoom forum last week called "We Are Victors," the voices of formerly missing children and their parents. I think it was the first time that anybody in this country had been hearing the children and their parents speak publicly. We didn't give the children's last name. We protected no images of the kids. But it was very sad to hear one boy, 15, when I asked him, why did you leave home? He had left home for 3 weeks. He said, Miss, because I'm tired to see my mother cry because we're hungry, we don't have none to eat. So, you know, sometimes in a lot of us doing this work, well, those of us in the trenches know this kind of problem. But I don't know if a lot of Jamaicans recognize that children go missing because of that kind of deprivation, because of poverty. Child poverty is a big problem in this country, and I'm not sure we're talking about it nationally. I want to remind us that typically children who live in happy homes do not run away. And when I say happy homes, I'm not referring to homes that are materially endowed. I'm simply talking about homes, I don't care how modest they are, where children are loved, respected, listened to, they have a voice. Children who live in happy homes do not run away, typically. So I mentioned some of the push factors. And then there are pull factors, right? Children lured. A lot of the children going missing are lured by persons, of course, with ulterior motives. Many of them are adult males. And the concern I have is that many of them are not prosecuted and are walking around scot-free, having harbored a child and oftentimes sexually abused our children. Other pull factors, boyfriend, girlfriend, a lot of them are their peers, early sexual activity, other pull factors, in need for material things, you know, food and other things. For some of the children, they tell us life looks better on the other side. So they leave and they go and spend time with their friends or other persons, and sometimes they're missing for long periods. And of course, another pull factor is that, of course, they'd be lured by people who claim that they love them. So let me just say that recognizing the problem of runaways, here the Children's Cry 2 years ago launched our Runaway Prevention Program under the theme, Let's Talk, Don't Walk. And it's our website, we've advertised it up and down the place because we want the children to talk to us. We say to them, look, we know that life at home can be very, very difficult. And there are times children have to leave when you think about it. Because, you know, when you think of the sexual abuse, the levels of physical abuse and so on. But we say to the kids, call us, talk to us. Talk to us, because we will help you. We will get up other agencies to help you. But we also have to say to them, listen, you see, when you run away, and I know most kids don't have a runaway plan, sometimes it's 100% worse. It's much, 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 much worse for some of these kids. We've had kids that have gone missing. As you know, we said 82 were murdered. Kids who have gone missing, who have been gang raped, all kinds of awful, brutal things have happened to them. So as we looked on the large numbers of runaways and with our limited resources, we decided to start with children who were repeat runaways, since that clearly spoke to the continuous problems at home. And that's the group we've been working with, and we are working with initially, the repeat runaways. Now, the work involves home visits, counseling, and constant follow-ups to ensure that those kids return home and remain at home. So that's, I could say more, but I know I don't have that much time. In addition to this program, or Missing Children Support Program, here the Children's Cry offers other critical services for missing children, which include telephone interviews. We make phone calls with the support of Digicel to every single family member of every single child reported missing in Jamaica. And we do those phone interviews to be able to get all the information we need about the child. So we do those. We do family and child counseling completely free of charge. In fact, we provide transportation support for families traveling from other parishes to come into Kingston. Of course, this is before COVID. We have a school safety program designed to teach children how to protect themselves. We do parenting education. We have a school reintegration program where we monitor, track, and support the children who come back home and return to school to ensure that they're doing well and that they will graduate from school. So that's, I could say so much more, but that gives you a sense of our Missing Children's program. And I just want to end by talking about your topic. The topic for today is sexually, physically, and emotionally battered. Will our children ever be safe? I was told by the organizers that everybody's asked to answer that question. Will our children ever be safe? I just like to answer it before I completely run out of time. The answer is yes. Our children can and must be safe. The answer is yes, that they can be safe. But in my humble opinion, I think we have to put the problem in its proper perspective and then together work to make sure that our children will be forever safe. Now, as far as the care and protection of Jamaican children are concerned, when I say put it in the proper perspective, when you look as far as the care and protection of Jamaican children are concerned, our country, Jamaica, has the following. We have the Child Care and Protection Act. Dr. Carpenter mentioned it. Powerful, important piece of legislation. So we have the Child Care and Protection Act. We have 9 additional pieces of legislation for the care and protection of children. We have the Child Care and Protection Children's Home Regulations Act 2005. We have the Victims Charter 06. We have the Child Care and Protection Children's Registry Regulations, that was 07. We have the Trafficking in Persons Prevention, Suppression and Punishment Act, that was also 07. We have the Child Pornography Prevention Act 09. We have the Sexual Offences Act. We have the Cybercrimes Act. We have the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedoms Act. And we have the National Parent Support Commission Act. So we have all of these pieces of legislation. We have the Office of the Children's Advocate. We have the Child Protection and Family Services Agency, CPFSA. We have Victim Support Service. We have the Center for the Investigation of Sexual Offenses and Child Abuse, CISOCA. We have over 3,000 NGOs, including churches. We have several government ministries responsible for children, education, youth, health, justice, etc. We have child guidance clinics, right? So the question that has to be asked is this: how is it with this level of support? Look, I listed everything we have in a small country. Why are Jamaican children so endangered? What's happening? And I think we must reflect on that. Now, to answer my own question, and this is the last thing I'm saying, I believe that the answer lies in that critical national statistic that says that approximately somewhere between 80 and 82% of Jamaican children are born out of wedlock and live in single parent homes headed by women. Many of them don't know fathers at all. So it is a family life crisis, I believe, that we have. And I believe when we fix family, we will fix Jamaica and our children will be safe. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Mrs. Betty Ann Blaine, for your passionate presentation. And I've always admired, I want to say it publicly, I thank you for your commitment to the nation's children. I appreciate your passion, and I know it's very, very hard work to take care of those vulnerable children. I note with sadness the 82 children you said who were murdered among the missing children. And it's very, very sad. I thank you for highlighting the family crisis and by telling us that if we can deal with the problems of the family, we will begin to see the increased safety of our children. And I want to note what you said, that children who live in happy homes are not going to run away. So thank you very, very much for that passionate presentation. Thank you for your commitment. It was excellent. And I just want to welcome, I know that we have persons from the USA, from Canada. So thank you, hail you up, and thanks a lot for joining us. You have the children's business in your heart, and we thank you for joining us. So now I see the questions coming in. I'm going to remind you that you can put your questions in the Q&A section and also in the chat on YouTube. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today as we discuss child abuse in Jamaica. And now we are going to turn to Mrs. Rosalee Gage-Grey, who is the CEO, Child Protection and Family Services Agency, CPFSA. Thank you very much for joining us, Mrs. Gage-Grey. You two are very hard worker. So, and you know that you have our support, you know that. So go ahead, Mrs. Gage-Grey, over to you.
Thank you so much, Professor, who is moderating for us this evening. Thanks for the invitation to be a part of this panel to our fellow panelists, Miss Paula Llewellyn, Dr. Carpenter, Miss Betty Ann Blaine, and to our two young people, DeShaun and Nathan. Happy Child Month as we are closing out the month. And we want to say that we celebrate our children every day, but it's good to have a special month when we can recognize them for being children, you know, and to celebrate their achievements during the period. Because I'm gonna present some statistics, I'm gonna use a PowerPoint presentation. Let me see if I can share my screen.
Yeah, look for the green share screen at the bottom of your computer. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm just making sure that I have the right presentation. One sec. Okay, I think this is a correct one. Okay, so we are the Child Protection and Family Services Agency, and we were formed out of the merger of the Child Development Agency and the Office of the Children's Registry, now the National Children's Registry, in November 2017. We're under the purview of the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, and our primary piece of legislation that guides our activities is the Child Care and Protection Act of 2004. Our mandate is to provide care and protection to children who are at risk or otherwise deemed to be in need of care and protection. And as we look at the statistics, we will see the different types of abuse types that would deem a child to be in need of care and protection. But the Act also speaks to who is a child in need of care and protection. And it speaks to a child who has no parent or a parent or guardian who is unfit or not able to properly take care of their children. A child who has experienced any of these abuses, physical, mental, emotional, or sexual abuse, victims of violence, perpetrators of violence. We do have children who are perpetrators as well, and they too need our support. Child labor are just a few of the items that designate a child who is in need of care and protection. The United Nations Conventions on the Rights of the Child was ratified by Jamaica in 1991, and it details the rights that children have, and it speaks to non-discrimination. It speaks to the best interest of the child, the right to life, survival, and development, and most importantly, the respect for the views of the child, and this speaks to child participation. And we are happy to have those two young men from Campion College who is with us this evening. The Act also defines a child as someone under the age of 18 years. It strengthens the care and protection of children by introducing new standards for their treatment. And this we see especially for the Children's Homes Regulation. It speaks specifically to how children within the care of the state should be treated. It importantly says that every adult has a duty under the Act to report. And this reporting is whether you suspect or you actually know that a child is being abused or otherwise in need of care and protection. So all of us as adults have that responsibility to report if we suspect, if we know for sure that a child is or is likely to be, as the Act specifies. The duty to report, as I said, is whether or not you are certain. You don't have to be sure. And you report to us at the NCR, and the report is taken confidentially, and our investigators will investigate. And just to indicate the penalty under Section 9 for cruelty to a child is up to $1 million. Just some basic statistics that shows the situation of Jamaican children. 10 in every 1,000 children are the subject of child abuse and maltreatment reports. 79% of children witness violence in their community or in their home. 68 of every 100,000 Jamaican children are victims of violent crimes. Approximately 80% of Jamaican children experience some form of psychological or physical violence administered as discipline, and this is corporal punishment. And we are indeed supporting a call for the total banning of corporal punishment across the country. That's going to take some doing because of our cultural underpinnings, but we believe that this is something that should be done. We have approximately 4,600 children in our care in the child protection sector, and we have another 8,000 or more who access our services on a daily basis for the year across the island. In a report, that study we did on bullying, it was reported that 65% of students are bullied at school. So that's just a basic, some basic statistics that's showing you the landscape in terms of abuse of children within the country. Overall, we undertake several activities and programs across the agency. We do our intake services, and you see those listed there: residential childcare facilities. We have a strategic objective to retain children in their families, and so our living in family environment, which includes our supervision, children on supervision order, which is where the court makes an order for the child to remain home whilst a social worker supervises that child and provided support for that child in their own homes. We have the foster care program, adoption, and family reintegration, which is where a child might come into care for a period, and working with the families and the child, we get the child back home into their family. Our counseling services and our psychology unit, this is a unit that is very critical. We see a number of children who come to us with psychosocial issues. and therefore they need this service. We have 4 officers across the island in terms of clinical psychologists, and we work very closely with the Ministry of Health through their child guidance clinics across. And we also refer to private practitioners who provide these services for us as well. We are seeing that the courts are now asking for more psychological assessments to aid them in making decisions concerning children. We think that's a step in the right direction, but it is causing us to have to provide those resources so that the matters being addressed for children can be adequately addressed as the judges seek to make their decision in the best interest of our children. Betty Ann spoke to the missing children and the Ananda Alert, and very commendable of the support and the work that Hear the Children Cry does in that area. What is child abuse then? Any act or failure to act on the part of a parent or caregiver, which results in death, serious physical or emotional harm, sexual abuse, or exploitation of a child. And we have listed there the types of abuse: physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, child trafficking, child labor, child pornography are just a few of those that are there. In looking at the number of reports that are made through the National Children's Registry, up to about February of 2020, we're averaging about 1,200 cases per month. Since about March 2020 had a drastic decline. We received just under 400 cases for the month of March. That's when we started the COVID procedures there. From latter part of last year to this year, we are averaging about 800 to 900 cases, but we are nowhere up to the 1,200 that we were getting before. And here we are not saying that the abuse is not taking place. We are saying that that possibly the children don't have the regular avenues of reporting. Remember now schools are online, and whilst they could be at school talking to their peers or guidance counselors, most of those and even church now is restricted. So the children possibly don't have the avenues to report. So you can see in this chart where from 2015 to 2020. So you can see in 2020, the drastic decline there to just under 10,000 cases, whilst we were averaging about 13,000 for the other periods. When we look at the statistics, and this is quoting the 2018, we have flagged some parishes just by virtue of where the reports are coming from. But what we find generally is that the reports of child abuse are mirroring the crime hotspots. So where you have high levels of crime and violence, we are getting reports from those parishes. Of note is the Western Belt, Westmoreland featuring very highly, Hanover in recent times. And of course, we have Kingston and St. Andrew, Clarendon, and St. Catherine as parishes that features highly in the reports that are made. In terms of types of incidents, we are seeing, as on the screen there, sexual abuse, physical abuse. I must note the behavioral problems or challenges that are reported. And these could be anywhere from children running away, children staying out late, children not forming associations with gangs or otherwise. And I think from 2019, we are seeing where this type of abuse or reports coming with behavioral challenges have now passed that of neglect, which was previously the most prevalent or reported cases of all the incident types. And so this is where now we have to be having programs that are going to address the behavioral issues and the psychosocial issues that our children are experiencing that would bring them. To note also that a parent, the law allows a parent to take a child before the court to say, I just can't manage this child is posing these challenges. And it's an area that we're actively seeking to do some work on, because the law presently, that's the Child Care and Protection Act, gives judges the option to give children correctional orders for this category. And we are, that's section 24 of the Act, we are seeking to amend that section, that option would not be given to children. And this gives the graphics from 2020 to 2021, and you can see the fluctuations in the numbers. And as I said, in April, the numbers dropped below 400, and we are seeing in 2021 that although the numbers are coming up, our response to the fluctuations with the COVID, the restrictions, is to be using the social media. We do drive-throughs in communities to spread the word, to get out there, to be in communities. We target communities that we are getting a lot of reports from, so we can get the information out so that persons know that we are still open. We can't work from home, so we are at work in the field and taking and fielding reports and doing our investigations and providing the necessary intervention. So you would see that for the period 2019 to 2021 through our investigations unit. And the figures from the NCR and investigation might be a little different, because we do have walk-ins who and other reports that might come into our offices directly and not necessarily go through the registry. But all these reports, as the registry is the repository for all the reports, they eventually get there. So we saw a 26% decline compared to previous years of the sexual abuse cases. We're not saying that these are not happening, and this is very concerning to us as we seek to ensure that our children are protected, and if they are abused, that we are still able to get to them and to provide the necessary intervention for them. And that's another graphic description there of the types of cases over the 2 years. This is showing the spread for 2020 across the parishes. So we see St. James, Westmoreland, St. Anne, St. Mary, a little up, Kingston and St. Andrew, St. Catherine, Clarendon are the parishes that we see with significant amounts across the 4 major incident types: sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect, and behavioral challenges. Another depiction of that as well, comparison year on year. Still seeing the peaks in the Westmoreland, St. Anne, Kingston and St. Andrew, St. Catherine are the parishes that are showing that. So what has been our response? We believe that we have to be proactive, and so we have been doing, with COVID now, we have moved from walkthroughs to more drive-throughs, where we drive through the communities, we do strategic stops, and we do issue information to families and children that we see in those communities. Our Children and Family Support Unit provides practical support and advice and counseling to families. This we are seeing a caseload being built in this area, because once we get those investigations, if it is that the child doesn't have to go before the court, and with some support, that this is where this unit now provides that support, practical support. They could need a bed, initial bed, a stove, a fridge, or some activities, some things that could help them to earn, and of course the counseling support. And it's our major referral area where we refer them to other allied services. So for example, Ministry of Labor and Social Security for support that on the PATH program, or to Food for the Poor for housing assistance, or other allied services that can provide services. Because sometimes people don't know how to access these services, so we provide that link that can get them into those support services. Our first responders, we recognize that a number of the children that were coming to our attention had been victims of some violence in their community, or they have seen death in their community or in their families. And so our first responders respond with the police, with victim services, and we try to do the grief and bereavement counseling very early so that families can be aware of the signs to look out for. And it prevents children from later on coming into care if we can provide that early response. The multi-agency project with the other agencies, the OCA, the CISOCA, and others, is where at Ruthven Road at the center, we have officers assigned who, once a child comes in, they are interviewed. They don't have to be interviewed multiple times, but our officers are on site. We have a hybrid of that activity across other parishes, the Western Belt in St. James and in Manchester, but this is something, and in the recommendations later on we'll highlight what we think needs to be done to the project to have it replicated across the country, as is at Ruthven Road. At Ruthven Road is a one-stop shop. You have the doctors on call, you have the social workers there, you have the police there, and what we have seen is that once a child comes with a parent or the family, most times they are able to go back home because the police would have acted immediately to go pick up the perpetrator, for example. So the risk is lessened and the child could go back home instead of being placed in a child care facility. Our psychology unit, through partnership with Micro Youth Counseling and Resource Development, do provide some support there as well, and we are seeking to partner with others who can help us to provide the support. If we should say a major area of need and concern is the psychosocial and therapeutic care that our children need. And this is an area, we hear the statistics, we hear the research coming from the pandemic and the impact it is having on mental health. And this is an area I think we have to pay very, very keen attention to our children who are not experiencing their usual activities. And so this is an area that we have to pay very keen attention to. The Smiles Mobile is a mobile mental health unit. This was provided, the first is a retrofitted 35-seater coaster bus. And this was first given to us by the US, the EU through UNICEF, and we have expanded. Now we have 3 mobile units that goes to communities and to childcare facilities to do screening and assessment and to provide intervention, and this has been working pretty well. What are some of the challenges that we see? The culture of silence is still very active. We know that there is real fear of reporting, and so we have to provide the avenues whereby persons can feel confident to report and not to be fearful. We need to increase levels of violence against children right across the sector. Too many of our children are experiencing and seeing violence in their communities. Limited remand spaces, and as I said before, our focus is to keep the children in their families, and so we have not been expanding the number of spaces because we want to work with families to keep the children home. But if it is that they can't be there, is there some other family member, is there a foster care program or other home-based program that they could be placed in as well? Increasing the cases, in terms of our caseloads, very high for the standards. Officers have over 100 cases per officer, which is way or more. Some even have up to 200, and whilst we are able to respond, it is the timeliness and it is the in-depth intervention that is required for all of those cases. An integrated case management system we have implemented here at the CPFSA SOHIMA, which is a human services software that we acquired, but we are seeking to have other partners who would be able to log on to that system and to input their information so that we can have a more comprehensive information on what's happening to children right across the sector. There needs to be improved coordination between the stakeholders. We have mentioned the Ministry of Health through their Child Guidance Clinic and the hospital network where our children seek services, and of course the Jamaica Constabulary Force, specifically Sissoka. Very close working relationships, but you know, it's a critical stakeholder, or as in some regards, this is where the children and their families go first. And so we have to have a close collaboration there. And in terms of our residential facilities, not necessarily in expanding for space, but creating environments where our children can feel comfortable as a last resort for intervention there. And what would we recommend? A national first responder system, emergency response, if you wish, whereby you would have a team to include social workers, clinicians, the police, other stakeholders who can provide ready access and intervention once there is an incident in a community or there's a family in distress, that you have this response system. There are parts of it that we do coordinate and respond, but it needs to be a national system. Expansion of the Center for Investigations of Child Abuse, Sissoka. We want replicated across the country in the different areas for the police, Sissoka. So you do have Sissoka offices across the country, but they are not linked into one main reporting center as in Ruthven. And we want this so that the same services that are provided at Ruthven is afforded to officers in the rural areas where police and to get the evidence for court. And so you have to have the police with a rape kit, for example. And it could take you hours in the hospital to get that done. At Ruthven Road, doctors are there on call who can right away do all of those tests that are required there. 24-hour call center, we are expanding at the National Children's Registry, and that will come on stream very shortly, where we'll have 24-hour coverage. Presently now we go up to about 16 hours, but our police and emergency services have the numbers of our officers on call who can take those calls outside of the regular working hours. Our therapeutic center, as we said before, the psychosocial and mental health issue is very critical, and we want that services to be expanded. We are about to break ground for a therapeutic center. More to come on that within the next month or so. And we hope that before the end of this financial year, we will have at least one center up and running. Sustain partnerships between our stakeholders. We reference the Ministry of Health. As I said again, mental health is a very critical area and in need of support. Last week we celebrated Mental Health Week, and we want to just say that this is a critical area for us in child protection. A coordinated response to sexual and reproductive health. Dr. Carpenter did mention some aspects of it. The children have to know. We have to teach them age appropriately about sexual and reproductive health, because when they have information, they can make informed decisions. And we have to find a way that we can break this down to our children. Yesterday, I was doing a presentation. A church had asked me to present to some Sunday school children, and I asked the age group. They said it was ages 6 to 8, and there was an 11-year-old in the group. And so I was speaking to sexual abuse and how they can help to protect themselves and how they should report. And one of the little girls posted in her in the chat, I am very uncomfortable in discussing this topic. And so I had to shift. I acknowledged what she said and had to shift, and we'll do some follow-up with the church with her. But this is just that the children need to know. They need to know so that they can make informed decisions. And we always call for harsher penalties. But we also want to go, and Dr. Carpenter mentioned this as well, that the perpetrators do need help. Yes, our focus is on the children, and but unless we fix other aspects of the society, our children will continue to get abused. And we want to make sure, especially when we have younger children, children under 18, that is being perpetrators. We look at the crime statistics, we get the list of children in police detention each day, and the full gamut of charges are on it for children as young as 13. And this is really not acceptable, and we need to be able to provide support to our young people. And finally, for the reporting, we use 88 Protect. Soon we have been assigned a 3-digit number, which we believe that children will be able to call through much easier. And it's 211. You'll hear so much more about it in the coming weeks as we seek to provide services for our clients, especially our children, to get in touch with us. There is a number that you can WhatsApp or text, 878-2882, and report at childprotection.gov.jm. Walk into any of our offices. We are still open. The necessary COVID protocols are in place. And our social media pages at CPFSAJM, and you can contact us there. Thank you so much for listening, and we are available to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Mrs. Rosalee Gage-Grey. This has been a very comprehensive presentation, and we commend. Are you hearing me? Are you hearing me now? Okay, so thank you very much, Mrs. Rosalee Gage-Grey. It has been a comprehensive presentation. We thank you for all your hard work. We note the decline in the number of cases during the pandemic, but I note that you gave us a caution there. So we are cautiously optimistic that it is indeed a true decline of child abuse. We note the responses, a lot of responses. And I also know that you highlight the coordination of efforts is very important. And the psychosocial, that theme has been coming through every single one of our presenters. So we remind you that you can write your questions in the Q&A section there. I see some questions, I see about 6 of them, but please ensure that you have your questions and comments there. So thank you very much, Mrs. Gray. We are now going to turn to our DPP, Paula Llewellyn, to give her words and her thoughts on the topic. Thank you, everybody who's just joining us. We are on our final presenter now, but we welcome your thoughts and comments in the Q&A. Over to you, DPP.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chair, Mrs. Gage-Grey, Dr. Carpenter, Hear the Children Cry, convener, Ann Blaine. Thank you very much. Boy, this topic, whenever we think of child abuse, it is a sad topic. But certainly as a prosecutor, we interact with complainants who are children, young persons, both male and female. Where the males are concerned, we have cases of buggery. Where the children are concerned, where the females are concerned, we have a variety of offenses. We have rape, we have grievous sexual assault, we have sexual intercourse with a person under 16, we have the sexual grooming of a child. It happens with boys too. Sexual touching or interference. In the Offenses Against the Person Act, you have Section 28, You have the issue of abandoning or exposing a child, whereby the child's life is endangered and you'll be liable if found guilty of a term not exceeding 3 years. But usually I think the prosecutors in the lower courts, where most of these matters are handled under the Child Care Protection Act, they go with that act. I was very interested to see, I think Mrs. Gage-Grey, this is the first time I've had the opportunity to really see a presentation by you. And I'm going to here and now invite you to come and address some of my prosecutors. We have a sexual offense and human trafficking unit. And I think in terms of the range of services that you offer, it would be good for us to be kept up to date. When we prosecute cases involving children, we usually, where there are complainants, we seek to treat them with a lot of sensitivity. We will advise that they work with somebody from the victim support unit from the Ministry of Justice. We sometimes get in touch with Mrs. Gage-Grey's entity there, the CPFSA. We also on occasion get in touch with the children's advocate, and we really try as far as we can to also work with SISOCA, work with the detectives to try to make sure that we are sensitive to the circumstances surrounding these children. But I'm sorry I didn't get to hear all of Mrs. Blaine's address, but I know she usually is very strong on seeking to highlight the dysfunction in terms of some of these families or non-families, no family structure at all that a lot of these children operate in. Now, for us as prosecutors, we are not social workers, but as I said, we try to get in touch with agencies to make sure that something can be done. Because very often, in terms of cases where children are complainants, and may I say, ladies and gentlemen, we are seeing levels of depravity that are meted out to these children. And when you check out the background, you find very poor, what is common, poor supervision. I guess now we'll be looking into the neglect, which I think is breaching of Section 9 under the Child Care Protection Act. Careless parenting, poor supervision. The fact that we all, because we discuss it, you see a lot of high sexualizing of children, depending on the circumstances that they are being brought up in. It depends on what is happening to at school. And sometimes when you check it out, because we are in this age where pornography is readily available through the phone, the smartphones, the WhatsApp messages, Instagram, and any other platforms, is readily available to a lot of children. So sometimes in some of the cases that you see, you find that, for example, and I'm sorry to really speak truth to power, but you will find, okay, instances of rape or instances of sex under 16, and you will also have grievous sexual assault, where invariably if the child is being assaulted, we have seen a lot of men asking the children to have oral sex with them as well. Sometimes you see children assaulting children. I've seen brothers assaulting sisters. We have a lot of stepfathers sexually assaulting their daughters. And what is interesting is that sometimes this cuts across generations. We just had recently in the Court of Appeal, and I think the complainant, who was the daughter of her mother, was the stepdaughter of the accused. So technically she was like the grand stepdaughter of the accused, who turned out to be still her father because he had impregnated her mother, that's his stepdaughter, and her sister, twin sister. And she decided to give the evidence to break this, what she called generational curse. She did an interview with Cliff Hughes, and I think the Observer had it in newspapers today. So very often, especially when you have these big yards where you have a mother, no, you would have a grandmother, and usually single parent homes, as Mrs. Blaine was emphasizing, single parent homes. So you will have a big yard. You have the grandmother who may be like 40, 42. You have her daughter who she would have had when she was a teenager, anywhere between 13 and 17. Then her daughter now, she has her granddaughter who may be 13, 14, and is either getting pregnant or most definitely is sexually active. I have seen files, I've read files where you will have the accused, who is the boyfriend of a sister of the complainant. The sister may be 18, 20. The complainant is 13, but the boyfriend, when the back of the sister is turned, is also having sex with the 13-year-old after having sexually groomed her. So very often at the heart of it is lack of supervision. And what is even more tragic, we have seen situations where you have on occasion mothers pimping out their daughters. The mothers don't work. They don't set any premium on education as being the primary facilitator of mobility for you to work and earn money in an acceptable way. But what they do, they have their young daughters. They may have the stepfathers or friends of the stepfather, and they look the other way and are willfully blind when these men prey on their daughters in order to be able to get money to buy groceries or to get things. I can't even go into some of the details of what I've seen. There was a file that was being discussed with me by one of my assistant directors. We were trying to see what we could do. Mrs. Gage-Grey, husband and wife, Mrs. Blaine, husband and wife, married. And the mother, she had a 9-month-old, about a 10-month-old baby girl. She was sweeping out the living room, just outside. And she heard the baby giving a terrible squeal as if she was in pain. Now, she knew her husband was around, but she couldn't imagine what she saw. She just barely opened the door to the baby's bedroom. And right there in the crib, there was the husband using his erect penis to rub the genitalia of his female baby daughter. Now, on her evidence, after she reported it to the police arrested and charged him for indecent assault and grievous sexual assault. And when the matter came to the circuit court, and we were with the police trying to find the mother, she no longer lived at the address. The accused was still coming to court. The police tried to find her, and she was gone. So what we have, certainly as prosecutors, and I suppose Mrs. Blaine, you may see it, Mrs. Gage-Grey, you definitely will see it. This, I don't want to be an informer culture, or the informer fidel culture is glorified in a lot of the music, the culture, also within the communities, where there is I call it an accommodation of criminality by virtue of this looking the other way. And then there's a prevailing theme that we will find in some of the cases when you try to beg, plead with some of the mothers to bring their daughters to court to give the evidence, especially if there has been an intergenerational issue from grandmother to mother to daughter, the prevailing thing is it's just a little sex. I went through it. Why am I going to upset the apple cart? I don't work. And I need this man to be able to give me something so that the same daughter can go to school. So it is really unfortunate, I think, and I applaud Mrs. Gage-Grey and her team. I know that you would really like to have more resources. I applaud Mrs. Ann Blaine and her team. I applaud the Children's Advocate. I applaud Sissoko. But I believe that we need to have a sustained public education and targeted public education program in certain of these communities, in some of these big yard, tenement yard communities. Some of the communities, I'm not saying that you don't have incest and sex under 16 in the higher socioeconomic bracket. But what we have found that primarily, and I've had situations where doctors have been before the court for sexual assault, but the majority of the cases come from complainants and accused who occupy a lower socioeconomic bracket. And I believe that a lot of them need to be assisted emotionally and mentally. They need to be educated in respect of what is appropriate. It is not appropriate, no matter how poor you are, for girl children belonging to the mother to be in the same bed with the stepfather and everybody is sleeping in one bed. That is not appropriate. And we have seen it. You see it in we see it in our files. I went to Westmoreland recently on circuit, and I try, although I am the DPP, I try not to levitate into the ivory tower. I keep myself going into the trenches so that I can see for myself what Crown Council is going through. I can still interact with witnesses. And I spoke to a complainant, at the age of 23. She had 4 children, ages 6 to 1. And I'm not going to go into the details of the allegation. It's just too terrible, too gross. But she came to court. I had her come to court along with the victim support unit person, because the endorsement on the file was that she wanted to go on with the case. And it turns out, when I spoke to her, she told me that the day before, the accused had come there and had sex with her against her will. Now, according, he's on bail, and part of the bail conditions is that he's not to go anywhere near the complainant. She told me, and she held on to her dress and said that the accused bathed her this morning and put on her clothes. I don't know. You know, I have seen a lot as a prosecutor, but I've never heard of that. So I had to raise it in court and really open my mouth in court through the judge and ask the judge to warn the accused that, and the police being there, that he is to be immediately taken back into custody if he goes anywhere near the accused, near the complainant. When the lawyer was saying that his client was saying that is the complainant who had gotten sick some time before and asked him to still come and give an eye. Anyway, the judge warned him, but he started to cry and she started to cry. And when you look at the circumstances in which the young lady lived, deprivation, she lives in a family yard, but no emotional support. So I had to ask the victim support unit person there to work with her and give an eye on her and try to link her with the PASS program and other programs to see if we can assist her to be out of this sort of situation mentally. So all I can say is that those of us as stakeholders in the system, we can't afford to be impacted by the negative so that we are demotivated. We have to keep trying and continue to try. And we have to call on all members of the community not to look the other way, to seek to facilitate and empower your brothers and sisters. Even where Dr. Carpenter would say that a lot of these men who do these things, that they need counseling and they need help. That may be so. But invariably, when we look at our files, when we liaise with the police, the men are caught in a spiral of it's just a little sex. And everybody is being sexualized by the instant porn that is available via your smartphones. So a lot of the sexual assault, a lot of the neglect of children, another thing too, that is a pet peeve of mine, is the fact that in the breach of Section 9, the child neglect, where babies are left by, I call them careless mothers, to look after other babies while they go out to party, or the usual stories that they go into a shop. They're just going on the road to the shop. And usually it is in a family yard. So they think it is all right. And then they come back, the children are burnt up in the particular room. And everybody is crying. Well, I am here to say to you that as DPP, once if I get a file and the ingredients of breach of Section 9 or any other criminal offense is made out in terms of cruelty to children through neglect, or if there's manslaughter or any other offense that is made out, I operate with a split screen. Yes, I can understand. I'm a mother. I can understand the great sadness on the part of the mother who may have left the children to look after the children alone and unprotected. But without even blinking an eye, I will advise, recommend, and rule and advise the police that she is to be charged for breaching the Child Care Protection Act. It is terrible, because these babies, these children, who speaks for them, who protects them, when they are at the mercy of these careless parents who don't know anything about parenting? Because if they knew anything about parenting, and I mean, I'm saying this, and I cannot understand. You are 23, for example. You are 23. You don't work. You don't have any means of sustenance except catching on the eyelid of man number 1 or man number 2. And you're going to have 4 children in the space of 6 years. Where is everybody going to sleep? Then you're going to have man number 3 and everybody is sleeping on the same bed. What is the point? We used to say that it takes a village to raise a child. In some areas that we go, when we look at our files, it almost looks as if the whole village is assaulting the child, whether through neglect or by sexual assault. So I'm not going to bore you with the statistics, because we see, for example, in St. Mary, cases of sexual assault made up the last circuit 60 to 65% of the total cases on the list. In the home circuit court, cases of sexual assault, whether rape or sex under 16, are second only to the murder cases. You have St. Thomas, St. Mary, Westmoreland, Portland, St. Catherine, that are recording quite high sexual offense cases. And I would say, Mrs. Gage-Grey, the fact that the statistics have gone down as it relates to the number of reporting that you are getting about child abuse, it is because I suspect the children are not in school. Because when we look on our files, invariably, in a lot of the cases, it is the complainant, when they go to school, that they are complaining to the guidance counselor or a teacher, that activates Sissoko being brought in. Is that necessarily the mother? We have seen cases on the files. Yes, you have some mothers who will give their children support, but you will have the child saying that they didn't tell their mother at first that they were being sexually assaulted by the boyfriend of the mother. And then later when they did tell the mother, if the teacher now reports it to the Sissoko, the mother is beating the child. Because guess what? Her daddy house mash up because if the accused, her boyfriend, is put before the court, she doesn't work, and that is her means of sustenance. So I would like to see targeted public education programs in the same way that we have with human trafficking, in the same way that we have with HIV, in the same way that we have with even the COVID-19. It has to be consistent. The whole issue of not having children unless you can afford it, or what it means to be a parent, which means that if you are going to have unprotected sex when you are 13, 14, if it is that you are going to do that, 15, if you are going to have a child, then it means that to go to parties, to continue your education, you are going to have a setback unless you have the support. I think we need to have some targeted interventions, because the more children who are brought into the world in dysfunctional situations, the more neglected children, the more you're going to have psychiatric problems, or worse, you're going to have children feeling, the boys, that the only way they're going to be able to get a role model and escape mentally from the neglect is to mimic the dons with guns. Then you have a recruit for the gangs. So it is a multifaceted approach that has to be taken by the agencies, and not operating in silos either. I'm going to close now by again advocating that, notwithstanding all the wonderful work that all the agencies are doing, I think there is space for a multi-stakeholder committee like the National Human Trafficking Task Force that meets maybe once every 3 months, and all the persons, Mrs. Gage-Grey, the children's advocate, Sissoko head, and several other heads of the different agencies. We will make the head of my sexual offense and human trafficking unit available with all the figures and the statistics that we have seen in the courts. Sissoko would have their statistics. The perhaps gender affairs would also be there. And you look at the data, and that perhaps, in addition to the wonderful work that you are doing, will help to inform policy so that you have targeted intervention in some of these communities. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very, very much, DPP. You gave us the stark evidence of the high incidence of child abuse in our nation. We thank you for your hard work. Somebody just texted me and said, oh my God, DPP is distressing me. I know she's speaking the truth, but it's so distressing, so sad, because the poor supervision, the neglect, the careless parenting, high sexualizing of our children, the child poverty, the family in crisis, the accommodation of criminality, and this culture for dead, informal for dead culture, which holds us back all the time. So DPP, we thank you, your excellent presentation as always. We are going to ask the 2 young men that we had invited to be part of this forum to give their comments. I know you have lots of questions and we will take all of them. So we are going to ask Mr. Nathan Walker, head boy, Campion College, for his comments on all the 4 excellent presentations. I know you have been listening, and also you will follow with Mr. DeShaun Bradford, Deputy Head Boy, Campion College. We cannot speak about the young people without having them say, give their reaction on this presentation. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Walker.
Thank you so much again, Professor Henry Lee. Well, as the resident youth on this panel, I just want to say thank you to all of the panelists here today. It was an extremely enlightening discussion. A lot of key points especially stood out to me. Things about how children from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are even at a higher rate of being sexually abused, especially due to the lack of surveillance, as I believe DVP Llewellyn stated. Additionally, I resonate soundly with what Dr. Carpenter, Dr. Carpenter addressed in her presentation about how there needs to be a reformation of the education system, especially in regards to sexual education, because it is extremely lacking. As a student, there are a lot of information about the entire conversation about what is quote unquote good touch or bad touch, for the basics of the term, in my education system. So that was extremely important to note. And I just enjoyed all the panelists, the information and resources that was provided. They were extremely grateful. And one key point that I wanted to ask about to the general panelists is, what do you suggest for our schools basically to do to improve how our entire system, to ensure that we as children are protected? Because schools are one of the main areas in which we are residing and which we need to be protected. And I know that in some of our legislation there's not even a set definition for sexual assault. I believe, I'm sure DPP Llewellyn can clarify if I'm mistaken, but there's no set definition. It's taken from various spaces, and some of them are even outdated. So I would just love if any of the panelists, when we have time, to clarify and explain how we could improve that education system, as well as what we could go on towards in a legislative manner of improving and protecting our children. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Before anybody answers, I'll ask DeShaun Bradford if he has any comments, and then I will ask the panelists if they are taking note. Mr. Walker didn't identify which panelists he wanted to answer, but the questions are general. And so, Mr. Bradford, could you give your comments and questions, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. And I would want to say again, thank you to all our panelists for their very, very detailed presentations. There are certain things from that I would like to highlight that I found very profound. One of which was Dr. Carpenter's statement on the importance of, as Nathan said, to introduce sexual development and into the education curriculum, as well as in assessing the perpetrators, and not just the victims, but also the perpetrators. And so that we are not just essentially incarcerating illnesses and not treating them, right? I also found it very interesting about the different ways in which the child protection, the different ways and the different agencies that are put in place for the children. For example, the CPFSA that Miss Rosalee Gage-Grey spoke about, as well as Hear the Children Cry, and their work towards reducing the amount of child abuse that has been reported. Also, it was very interesting to see about the importance of the poor supervision and the hypersexualization of our children, and how that contributed to many of the cases that we have in the that we are experiencing. And also, seeing how that culture of non-reporting or not wanting individuals to come forward, right, and how that has negatively affected our justice system, and also how that has affected our children as a result of that. And also, as the DPP has emphasized, the importance of family planning and how we as a people can properly plan our families, and so that we do not have children growing into dysfunctional families, and then which as was brilliantly and wonderfully explained by the DPP, that dysfunctional families neglect children, right? So from the presentation, one of the questions that I had was, Miss Blaine had reminded us of the importance of family dynamics in the reduction of runaway cases. How or what policies do you suppose, and this can go to any other panelists, or what policies do you think could be implemented, or how do you think that the society can act so that we can improve the family dynamics, and in so doing reduce our runaway cases and improve the treatment of our children in our homes?
Okay, thank you very much to eloquent young men, head boy and deputy head boy, Campion College. Your teachers must be proud of you, and your parents and your fellow students. I don't know who wants to take the question about the sexual education in school and how can we implement that? And then, of course, the family. How do we deal with the issue of the family? Who wants to take the first question, these two questions, or make any general comments on what the young men had to say? Mrs. Blaine, I see your mic is open.
Well, yeah, well, okay. I want to address Mr. Bradford's comment about the family and his question. For a long time, I've said, fix a family, fix Jamaica. And, you know, Paula, and that was a wonderful presentation by everybody, Rosalee, Paula, Dr. Carpenter, all of those presentations, very, very informative and enlightening. Paula says that she's a prosecutor, not a social worker, but she certainly sounds like a social worker. Because she laid out all of the problems have to do with family life. And she talked about these young parents, the problem with poor parenting. I believe the answer is in restoring and reconstructing family life, and I think we can do it. If I had my way, I would, as a part of one of the other ministries, establish a Department of Family Affairs, where we can really look at, okay, you want to reconstruct families, where do you start? Now, Paula mentioned several times about recommending that we have a powerful public education program to talk about these problems, to highlight positive parenting. Many, many years ago, I know our two young men, Mr. Walker and Mr. Bradford, probably weren't born yet. I'm certain of it. But we had a powerful, powerful public education program in Jamaica named Two is Better Than Too Many. Now, it ran for some years, and I suspect the reason it was so successful was that it was sustained over a fairly long period of time. So if you're going to do a public education campaign, it can't be 1 month or 2 months. You have to run it because it takes a while for people to ingest it, digest it, and then act upon it, right? And so it was the Van Leer Foundation that provided the funding for this Two is Better Than Too Many campaign. And let me tell you this, it cut our birth rate by half, because it was an excellent campaign that really reached out to the women, the mothers, saying, listen, two is better than too many. And it happened at the same time. It converged with when we had the women working at the free zone here in Kingston at 3 miles. And although the pay was not much, these women going to work every day in the free zone, I can tell you, when you would see those women at 3 Mile dressed so nicely, our Jamaican women, they all went to work. They worked because every single Friday they knew they would get their pay. And so I want to say a part of building family life is you have to give the women work. Now, what Paula was talking about, is what we call an intergenerational cycle of poor parenting. So I had my child when I was maybe 17. Then my daughter come and she have hers when she's 16. The ages get younger and younger. The mothers get younger and younger. The grandmothers get younger and younger. And so so this is a problem, but we can fix it. We can fix it if we decide to focus on it specifically, to really drill down and look at, okay, how do you do this? Because the other thing Paula spoke about, and I want to say it to Mr. Bradford, and I think Mr. Walker mentioned it. Here is one of the problems. Child poverty is a big problem in this country. Something like mostly close to 40% of our children live in poverty, particularly the rural children. That's a problem. We live in these very two distinct Jamaicas. You don't see it more clearly than when you look at the child population in this country. That monument downtown Kingston dedicated to children who have died violently and tragically, I would say that 90% of them are children of the poor and working classes. So we have to, if we're going to take this issue seriously of protecting our children, we're going to have to dissect it properly, look at these two Jamaicas in which children live, what are children of the poor and working classes, their lives. We have to look at the families. I believe we can do it, but we need a dedicated department within some ministry that's going to take it on. And the last thing I want to say, we work with the missing children. I'm sorry, with the missing children, as I said in my presentation, right? We have been calling for a special unit within the JCF to handle the problem of missing children. Right now, we just have a missing persons call center, missing persons unit, but the numbers are so high. The problems are so complex, particularly with the repeat runaways, the fluidity, they go one day, they come back next day, they go next week, they come, that you need a specialized unit with people especially trained to deal with this problem. So Mrs. Gage-Grey, Rosalee also laid out a lot of recommendations. I support every single one of them. The expansion of Sissoka, others, and I believe together we can do this. I believe that Paula mentioned that we need a multi-stakeholder committee. I support that 100% as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Mrs. Blaine. And somebody responds, Wendy Mullins responds in the chat that the HFLE curriculum addresses sexuality and sexual health, which includes increasing awareness on child sexual abuse. Sadly, some schools do not deliver the curriculum as recommended, as focus is placed on academic subjects. That is true. It has been a battle with some traditional high schools to get the subject on the timetable, which is the reason why some students are not being aware of this type of sex education. Should be part of the curriculum. So there's a problem of implementation, and we have that all the time. We have so many policies and programs, and yet we have an implementation gap. So let me go to the questions. There have been many, and I thank you for your patience. Thank you everyone for staying with us. I know it's getting late, but we want to continue the conversation. So I'm going to take the first two questions. Do you believe that using a cultural framework will be important in understanding the nature of abuses and how persons respond? I believe that would be for Dr. Carpenter. And then, good evening. Is it possible for me to get, oh, that's a private matter for Betty Ann Blaine. They want an email address for you. You can put that in the chat. And Antonio Baker asks, with the implementation of the child diversion program, will those children who are deemed uncontrollable be routed through that program before they are locked up in juvenile facilities? So that is Mrs. Gage-Grey. That one would be for her. The first one would be for Dr. Carpenter, and I'll take one more before I take the next set. Mrs. Jones asked, Jennifer Jones, please expand on the need for improved coordination, especially with the police and MOHW. Thank you. So these three, well, yes, so I will take these three, ask Mrs. Dr. Carpenter to begin with the response about the cultural framework, and then Mrs. Gage-Grey to take the next two. Over to you, panelists.
Yes, thank you for that, Chair. A cultural framework is essential, and I don't think that there is any notion on the part of funders and implementers that we can make any change without understanding the cultural context. A cultural framework would include some of what was asked of our younger panelists about what can we do in schools. It's pointless having an HFLE curriculum, which I'm very familiar with and which has been revised more recently and which is being revamped to include greater emphasis on gender-based violence. It is pointless having that curriculum, not implementing it, and ignoring the cultural context that we're in. Many of the reasons for early pregnancies, intergenerational abuses, and early pregnancies continuing is that we continue to also hold the myths of the culture. If you have sex the first time, you can't get pregnant. If you have sex standing up, you can't get pregnant. So these myths are passed on intergenerationally. Sleeping in one bed with everybody, including someone who is not part of the original family. And that's not to say that fathers don't abuse their own biological children. But when everybody is sleeping in the same bed and the man or the woman becomes horny, let's use the language, then what do you think happens? Everybody is affected by it. So the things that both DPP, Paula Llewellyn, and Rosalee Gage-Grey have raised are extremely important in addressing these problems from a cultural perspective. We have to look at the culture of is just a little sex. All of these things are who we are, and we have to teach people about their feelings, their emotions, their sensations when they are touched sexually. Good touch, bad touch is for babies. Adolescents need more information on that, and as young people are growing up, they need to know who they are as a sexual being. So that's quite important.
Thank you, Dr. Carpenter. Mrs. Gage-Grey, over to you for the 2 questions, and I'll take another round of questions after that.
Okay, so the first question about children, and we're trying to find a child-friendly language to replace the uncontrollable child with. The law says a child who is beyond control. So the Child Diversion and the Child Diversion Act, and that's administered through the Ministry of Justice, focuses on children who are in conflict with the law. And the children are diverted to the program if one of the offenses that's listed in that act is committed. These children who are deemed to be beyond control are children who have not committed offenses. And so really and truly, they should not be given correctional orders. Whilst we do understand that some of the behaviors presented and they could be falling into bad association, we believe a therapeutic intervention is what is required. Most of the time when you do have interface and do the intervention with these children and you go back into their history doing the screening, you recognize that it is untreated trauma that has caused them to react that way. You ask the question, where is daddy? Daddy is dead, or they might have seen daddy killed violently. And so not having treated with that trauma causes them to react and behave differently. Or you might say to a parent, when did this behavior start? And it always almost goes back to an incident that was not treated accordingly. And we say even at very young ages, which is where our first responders go in and try to intervene early so that the children can get the help, so it doesn't get to the point where they are exhibiting those behaviors later on. So some of the cases, if they had committed very mild offenses, might be diverted, but we want a behavior modification program through the agency and other support services that can help the children to get back on track. If it is a mental health issue, then they need to be screened, assessed, and that diagnosed so that treatment can be given. Most of these issues are gonna take a longer term therapeutic intervention that's gonna address those issues. So yes, child diversion will help only if it's one of the scheduled offenses that would have been committed under the Child Diversion Act. The coordination I spoke to is still linked into the, so the child guidance clinics within the Ministry of Health are required to treat with both adults and children who, just children who exhibit or have mental health issues. The numbers, the appointments are very far because of the number of cases that they have to treat with. So we believe that there needs to be additional resources given to those clinics. We have, because of that issue, created our own psychology unit. And so what we have had to do, because our psychologists are at the master's level, we have had to get external supervision for them by a PhD level psychologists, and also have them working closely with the child guidance clinic to get the clinical supervision, because we don't have anybody internally to do that. So the coordination that we want is that we are able to refer children to those services and that they get the responses timely. whilst we can do some preliminary screening and assessment, especially for those children who are in our direct care, we believe that right across the spectrum, there are a number of children, especially during this pandemic, that are exhibiting signs or behaviors that could have mental health underpinnings, and these need to be properly screened and assessed so that the needs driven intervention can happen for those children. With the police, as I said before, we want Sissoko, as is operated in Ruthven Road, to be expanded across the sector. And here's why we want that. So Sissoko especially in the rural parishes, are not in every police station. But when there's a problem, a parent or a child is going to go to a police station, and that case now has to be referred out to an officer, who in the Sissoko office is St. Anne, it's in St. Anne's Bay, and then it might be way up in Alexandria to get down there. So we want a greater coordination. We want officers within, and I know that there have been sensitization with police officers in the different areas, but we believe that if you have a sufficiently resourced unit, just like how you have MOCA, you have any of those special units, why not have one of those units? Yes, there's Sissoko, but it needs to be resourced as any of those other units that's fighting crime, because the crime problem that we are having can be linked back to a social protection problem. And so we want to make sure that we are properly, the different arms of government are properly resourced so that they can respond. DPP spoke to children from the lower socioeconomic sector as, the cases that they are seeing. Here's the challenge. Most of those children from the middle to upper class are not coming, those reports are not coming through the system. They can go to private doctors, the intervention is privately done, and so you are not seeing those primarily reported in the numbers that we are seeing. So it's not that it's not happening in other strata of the society. Yes, the children in the lower strata is more vulnerable, but it is happening right across the sector, and those children also need intervention as well, and protection. That's the response.
Okay, thank you very much. And we have lots of questions. Just to remind you, we'll end about 7:30. We had planned to end at 7, but I don't want to leave all these questions unanswered.
If I could, with what Mrs. Gage-Grey says, yes, you do have children. They're in the minority in the middle to upper. But what tends to happen is that they have relatives that send them abroad, or they get private medical attention. You will have a couple who come through and they stay the course to give evidence in the case. Because I said, we have even had doctors before the court in terms of sexual assault. I know that. But invariably, because they may have relatives abroad, what you find is that they will give them we'll only get an get a note from the police, or the police will indicate that they have migrated. So there again, it is the people in the lower socioeconomic bracket. Some of them are able to migrate, but they are the ones, that you will see, I would say 85% of the times.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think the two questions are for Mrs. Gage-Grey.
Excuse me, Madam Moderator.
Yeah, go ahead.
Professor, I'm afraid I have to leave you. I want to thank you for this. Thanks to my colleagues. Thanks to Yui, those two wonderful young men, Mr. Walker and Mr. Bradford. Thank you so much. I too, this is an important discussion. We should have more of them. And I believe that the people here on this panel, Paula, Rosalee, people that have been doing this work for so long, they understand the problems. Many of us are in the trenches. We need to get together. We need to get together and look at the picture and say, okay, if we can achieve, now the biggest thing that has happened to children over the years was the Child Care and Protection Act, huge. huge. It was like a seismic shift on the country. The Ananda alert was another major thing, but we need now to look at what can we do truly to make a big shift in what's happening with children. And we must send a message across the length and breadth of Jamaica that you cannot harm a child and do not face our courts. And it must be so. Look, shouldn't, there's some societies where it don't happen, and I'm not talking about totalitarian states. We must send a message that you don't even think about it. You don't even think about it because we are determined to protect our children. So I just want to say that and to say thank you very much for having me. I'm sorry I have to leave, but thank you very, very much.
Oh, thank you very much for presenting. We thank you for your commitment and your hard work. And we will speak again, and we'll continue the conversation and implement some of what you have, all of you have suggested. Thanks a lot. So we'll take some of the questions quickly, because I know that we don't want to lose the audience, but so I might skip some questions. They said, what assistance is provided for pregnant infected children? How many parents have been brought before the court last year or this year? So I don't know if that would be a mixture of DPP. How many parents have been brought before the courts last year and this year? And then for Mrs. Gage-Grey, what assistance has been provided for pregnant infected children? And then I'll move on to other questions. This person had two questions, so I took one.
It's good evening, Corey Robinson, who is asking the question. It's difficult to give the specifics in terms of the 117 cases you're referencing. You could speak to me after, and we could see if we could get some more information on that. Once a report is made to us of an abuse case, we would do those investigations and see what intervention is required for the child in question. If it's a case where the parents say the child was abused outside of the home, and we have done the risk assessment and the child can remain there, then we'll have the child remain there and we do the necessary support. The Women's Center of Jamaica does an excellent job with our pregnant teens. If they have to come into care, we have Mary's Child run by mustard seed communities that cater primarily to pregnant teens. And so those support and intervention is given. And as soon as they are able to resume regular schooling, then assistance is given to get them back into regular schooling. So the intervention for the children is just like any other child who is deemed to be in need of care and protection, and we do provide those services to them as well. And we work with the hospitals, Victoria Jubilee Hospital, in terms of support for children in the antenatal and prenatal clinics, where we can provide some information and support to them there as well. Thank you.
Okay, DPP?
In respect of the number of parents, I assume that you're talking about from breaching Section 9 of the Child Care Protection Act, which speaks to cruelty to children or neglect, so that they are in need of care and protection. You'd have to consult the family court. Consult the family courts around the island and the court administration division, who would be able to give you those statistics. You'd appreciate that certainly at the level of the DPP's office, we don't prosecute matters in the family court. We deal with sexual assaults like rape, sex under 16, or any of the offenses that you would find in the Sexual Offences Act, or any offense against, contrary to the Offense Against the Person Act. But in respect of breaching the Child Care Protection Act, though you could bring the same Section 6 offense, that is the cruelty to the child, you could bring it before the circuit court, but I would say almost 100% of the times it is dealt with in the parish court. So you would need to check with the family court. Because I've been a prosecutor for how many years in the high court, and I've never seen one. So I know that they're all dealt with in the family court and the parish courts. So let's check with CAD or check with the family court. And for the people in the media, they should be able to give you the figures about the number of parents who have been put before the court.
And DPP, as you're on, what progress has been made on the sexual offenders registry? And then the other question about, do you have problems prosecuting the parents, and how frequently do they not appear in court? I'm just summarizing the questions.
Well, I think that probably would be dealt with in the parish courts. We wouldn't deal with the whole issue of the sexual offences registry. That would be dealt with. I have been made aware that as part and parcel of the convictions, so 1 or 2 convictions, the court has ordered that the person is to be registered in the sex offense registry. But it's not in the majority of cases. But in terms of whether there's a breach where that is concerned, I believe it is the parish courts, the lower courts, that would deal with that. And may I just indicate and apologize for not having recognized the 2 handsome young men that you also have on the panel, Miss DeShaun and Nathan. What I'd like to ask let me now be a member of the public and ask one of you young men, how do you deal with situations, I'm putting you on the spot, where you have young girls, and this transcends all socioeconomic brackets, where they're very sexualized, they're not concentrating, their schoolwork is like the minority. Perhaps Dr. Carpenter is smiling here. How do you, as young men, who I assume are focused in where you want to go in terms of your academics and your purpose in life, how do you at the school level deal with girls who are so highly sexualized that they are really bent on distracting you or getting you into trouble?
DeShaun, are you going to, or do I go first? Okay.
It doesn't matter.
Okay. Thank you for that question, DPP. Well, interestingly enough, I think I have to comment with 2 points to note. So one important point is that the school I attend, fortunately, the subset of girls that we interact with, they too have their heads on their body, to say colloquially, and it's the friends that we interact with more often than not are actually focused in their book and are pretty interested in furthering their education more than in the interest of pursuing any sexual relations. However, outside of my scholastic environment, there are a few female encounters that I know that are they're more leaning towards just a relationship and not focused, and they're trying to bring me in that direction. However, how I personally deviate is because I actually know my morals, I know my values, I know the goals that I want to attain in life, and so I have to focus on those specifically in order to make sure that I'm on the right track. I was raised by 2 amazing parents, so I have been instilled with the right belief systems, and so I try to focus on those as much as I possibly can. And I have a example to uphold for my school body and for my peers around me, and I'm trying to make a difference in this world. And so I know in order to do that, I have to be focused on focused on my education and focused on attaining the goals I would like to achieve. DeShaun would like to add anything?
Yes, so on the point that Nathan had mentioned about the students, the females that attend Campion, we are proud to say that from the females that we have been introduced to at Campion, they are not as hypersexualized as majority or those that were mentioned by Madam DPP. I would also like to mention that it speaks that it's also important that we mention self-control, that we teach children self-control. I was very blessed to be taught that, so that even though you are going to be introduced to various factors that may want to lead you astray. The fact that you're being taught self-control and you know your morals that Nathan had mentioned also, and you know what is important and that you have to represent yourself and in the best way possible. No matter what type of distraction comes your way, you will be able to turn a blind eye to it. No, not to turn a blind eye to it, but to turn away from it. And also the importance of surrounding yourself with individuals who also share the same principles as you do. So many times you may you may have situations where you may have the self-control, but because of the surrounding pressures, you may be forced into situations that you necessarily may not have chosen. So it is important for us to surround ourselves with individuals that share our same morals, right? That also have self-control. So we surround ourselves with females who appreciate and support themselves and are proud of themselves and are not victims to the elements in our society. And yeah, so those are things I believe that have allowed me to stay on the straight and narrow path.
Excellent point. And it just tells us that we have to let the young people talk to the young people, you know. I mean, those of us who, I'm not saying that we are irrelevant, but a lot of times the messages are better received when the young people are speaking directly to their own colleagues. So, you know, the youth forums and trying to speak serving as mentors for maybe the less privileged children would be one of the strategies that we can implement. I want to turn to Dr. Carpenter. There are two questions there which I think are directly related to you. How do you help a perpetrator who does not acknowledge he has a problem, but continues to put blame on the victim? And then there's one that says, what strategies can be implemented to assist these traumatized children to return to some level of optimum functioning and prevent them from becoming abusers themselves? So I think these are directly for you, Dr. Carpenter.
I don't think we have enough time. And I want to congratulate our young panelists on their steadfastness and remind us that at the university, 70% of our graduates are women, 30% are men. So it is not that a majority of our female members of the youth population are leading young men astray. However, yes, I do appreciate what they had to say. How do we prevent it? How do we address perpetrators? And how do we deal with young children who have been victims of sexual abuse? In a way, as wide and as broad as the scope of those two questions are, we can dovetail them to one aspect that is common to both, which is family of origin issues. The young child who has been a victim of abuse and the older adult who is abusing is often also a victim of abuse. And if we look at the family of origin issues, some of which DPP mentioned, such as even space. Space is a family of origin issue. Poverty is a family of origin issue. Poor resources is a family of origin issue. Lack of education for the female members of the family is a family of origin issue. And invariably, if the perpetrator had themselves, male or female, because women are perpetrators, if either of them had been molested as a child, you can bet your life that by revisiting the childhood experience of confusion, hurt, betrayal, and all of what they originally experienced before they were groomed into accepting the abuse is going to be the most useful tool in helping them to exercise an empathy. Because what is happening there is that as an adult, they are not seeing the child victim. As a child, they have no protective defenses for children. And there are a number of ways that we see that pedophiles in particular deal with young children in non-protective manners. There are some telltale signs of a pedophile that don't include touching a child. And you will notice that their behavior does not shift into what we call mother speak. When we speak to young children, we tend to pitch our voices higher. We tend to incline ourselves. We go, oh, how's the baby? That's a natural reaction of protection. And pedophiles don't do this, male and female pedophiles. And we watch things like that as behaviors that are indicators. So if we recognize that the pedophile does not see the victim as a child to be protected, but rather as an object for pleasure, then we will understand that until we get them thinking again about their own stage at which they were indeed in need of protection, you will not engender empathy. What is lacking is an empathetic response of protection of the young child. And for the young children, depending on their ages, because we say children and that's a broad spectrum. We have child and we have adolescent, and I always separate them. An adolescent is not a child, and a child is not an adolescent. A school-age child has a different mental schema from an adolescent whose hormones are also kicking in. So we treat those differently. But for the very young child, they may need a child psychologist who does play therapy to assist them in uncovering the memories. And part of what we've not spoken about, but which I would be remiss not to mention before we close, is shame. We forget the shame that accompanies the victim, but not the perpetrator. We forget that when the victim finds themselves in the context where their body is supposed to respond pleasurably to the bad touch, because biologically that's how we're designed, that brings them a lot of shame. And that's part of what we have to deal with therapeutically. How to get them to a place where it is not shameful that their bodies have betrayed them. So keeping young people from an understanding of how their physical bodies respond to touch, etc., is not helpful. We have to tell them about the emotional, psychosexual response to touch and nice words and all of the priming things that a perpetrator will do to get their attention. Yeah, it's a much more complex answer than that, but that's the one commonality that I could find between those two questions.
Okay, thank you. We'll take about 4 more questions, 2 for DPP, and then we'll end with Mrs. Gage-Grey. DPT, as they said, is there a time limit wherein one can bring charges of sexual molestation on a perpetrator who sexually assaulted a child, now an adult, but who still suffers from the impact of that molestation? And then the other one is what program is there for parents who have been convicted of neglect, I imagine, and they have left prison or they have been fined? Is there a program of support? Over to you, DPP.
Thank you very much. Yes, even if it is that you were molested at the age of 13, 14, but you have not given a complaint to the police until you are 25, 30, 35, there's no statute barring for the matter to be brought before the court. And it's a concept in criminal practice called historical sexual abuse. We have prosecuted a few here, successfully too, where the child might have been, the woman who is now in her 40s was molested when she was in her teenage by her stepfather. And I'm going to share with you a wonderful story which ties in some of what Dr. Carpenter was saying. There was a lady in her 30s, married and has her 3 children and a very supportive husband. And she was determined, she made a report to the police about the fact that she's in her 30s, her stepfather having sexually assaulted her when she was a teenager. Her mother was still married to him, and her mother looked the other way. So when she was in her 30s, happily married with 3 children, she made a report, the police investigated, and he was brought before the court. Now, my prosecutors, at least 2 of them, had to really sensitively interview her, and the husband was very supportive. And do you know that when we brought the matter, it was right in home circuit here, before the court, and jurors having been empaneled, we're ready to start the case. The complainant was in the courtroom, the accused was there. The wife was there as well. The accused, that is the mother of the complainant, he broke down, cried, and said pleaded guilty. He pleaded guilty and he expressed remorse, but he was still given some years. He was incarcerated. And ladies and gentlemen, about 4 or 5 days after the case, remember this lady's in her middle to late 30s, married for several years, has 3 children. Her husband called me. Said, Miss Llewellyn, you don't know me, but my wife was a complainant, and he explained. I said, oh yes, Crown Counsel were telling me about the case because it is unusual to have a complaint. It's called historical sexual abuse, where the incident happened when the person was a child, but they report the matter when they are adults, perhaps 30s in their 40s. And he said to me, Miss Llewellyn, I want to thank you, your staff, for how sensitively they treated my wife, but she has got closure, having made a report, come to court, prepared to give the evidence, and heard her stepfather plead guilty to what he did to her. And I was so taken aback when he just said to me, Miss Llewellyn, you know, since I have been married to my wife, it is the best sex we have been having since after the verdict. And I said, sir, he was going to go on again. I said, sir, mind, TMI, too much information. I wish you and your wife well and all the very best for the future. That's just a story there. It's called historical sexual abuse. And in respect of the second matter, well, I suspect that when the matters, that's why they are mainly dealt with in the family court, when the matters are dealt with in terms of breaching the cruelty to children, where it has to do with more neglect, or when a child is in care of need and protection because of the neglect, I think the family court, they use the social workers. And this is where Mrs. Gage-Grey, if you have any influence with the minister and the powers that be at the Ministry of Education, I believe that Jamaica needs to triple the number of social workers that we have in light of some of the disadvantageous situations that persons who cannot afford to take their children out of one school or take them out of a community or migrate or send the children abroad, but they are still stuck in the same socioeconomic big yard situation where even though the accused may have left, you have other predators waiting there because guess what? It's just a little sex. So I think if we had more social workers now, the court employs these social workers to do social inquiry reports, to inquire into detail before they make the particular orders and they decide what the penalty is going to be. Is it going to be incarceration? Is it going to be a supervision order, and assistance by social workers to shadow them, right? Is it a situation where they're going to take the child and put the child in a home? It all depends, but usually the judges use the social workers or the probation officers to inquire into the community, inquire into the family, to look to see are the persons on path, do they need assistance? Should there be some psychiatric counseling or, before they finally decide what the sentence will be. And very often they have the leeway to be able to give orders to perhaps assist eventually the child being able to be reunited with the parent after there has been some intervention to alleviate or assuage or neutralize or deal with what was the underlying cause, either for the cruelty to the child or the abuse, or sometimes to make an order that even when the parent comes out, if there is a sister or some other family member whose circumstances are better, the court can make that order or invite the family to come back to see if further orders should be made. So I think the family court would have some flexibility in
Okay.
terms of dealing with that.
I have been ignoring our participants on YouTube, so I need to take at least one question. Hermid Metcalf is asking, what is the rationale for the differentiation of the age for sexual consent, 16, and the age by which we define a child, DPP? Why do we have these three different ages? 12 for criminal responsible, 16 for sexual consent, 17 child. Why do we have those?
Well, it is
Different?
because of we belong to the common law, which was rooted in England, and through case law experiences, circumstances, as far as the law is concerned, for a child to have criminal responsibility, you must be over 12, I think in some circumstances, and over 14 in others. Otherwise, you are what we call dole incapax, that you will not have the ability to be criminally responsible for any act, even murder, once you are below 12. I believe that is what is stated in our Child Care Protection Act, which codifies the common law. In respect of consent, sexual consent, I believe in terms of the offenses under the Sexual Offences Act, 16, if you are just shy of 16 and you have sex with somebody in that age range, then you are going to be caught by the law, because a child under 16 cannot consent. So it matters not if she was the person who said, come and have sex with me. Once you have the sexual penetration by the male of the female in those circumstances, and we are able to prove her age as being under 16, then you will be caught. It's just the law seeking to administer justice given the particular circumstances that surround the whole question of criminal liability and consent at the different ages. There's one school of thought that believes that perhaps we should move consent on issue up to 18. There's another school of thought that says it should stay at 16. But it really is just how the jurisprudence has evolved in the common law system, and in the mix, the policy imperatives of the government of the day in terms of maintaining that, or in terms of making laws for the good order and government of the country, depending on what is happening, responding to what is happening, and maintaining the status quo or changing it, depending on what the policy, the clamor of the public is saying, and what they believe, notwithstanding the clamor, is good for the administration of justice and the particular persons at the different age stages, depending on the circumstances.
Thank you. So 2 final questions for the panel, and that is for Mrs. Gage-Grey. I apologize. We had lots and lots of questions, and I know some of you won't get your questions. But finally, for Mrs. Gage-Grey, they said that what is the plan for to drastically reduce the caseload for children's officers in the CPFSA, and what can teachers and parents do to help in getting our children in a higher level of safety? You have the last question, then we'll go to Mr. DeShaun to give the vote of thanks. Over to
So I'm sorry I have to leave. I'm still downtown and I need to get home before curfew. But it's very critical that, and I agree with DPP, that we need additional social workers in all the different areas that they work. With the merger with the NCR, with the OCR to form the NCR, we have made a proposal for additional social workers to get the caseloads down. Our proposal to have them at 50 or below per case officer. And so we are taking steps to have that, and we have the support of the minister. So we expect that we will get some additional positions pretty soon that will assist us to respond in a more timely manner and also to do longer term interventions for the children. And what was the second question again? I think I missed that.
Yeah, what can teachers and parents, I suppose your concluding remarks on how the prescribed persons can help to reduce child abuse.
I think parents have the ultimate responsibility. The Child Crime Protection Act says that parents have the responsibility for the upkeep of their children, and if with support they can do a better job at what they're doing, then the government should support should be given, and that's what we strive to do. That we want to support parents and their families to keep the children. We want them to create environments where our children can thrive and can achieve their fullest potential. There are prescribed persons, and these are persons who come in contact with children based on the nature of their work, or doctors, medical health professionals, or teachers, social workers. And we are saying to these persons that you have a responsibility, not just a legal responsibility, but more a responsibility to assist a child who is in need. So if we see or hear or know that a child is being abused, even if we suspect, that we should make the effort and the time to report to the relevant authorities. We are asking that, our children are precious. Our children want to survive, It shouldn't hurt to be a child. And so we are asking that all of us have the responsibility to ensure that our children are protected and that they can live to their full potential. We have two wonderful examples of two young men who was on the program this afternoon, and we see what it was very good to hear Nathan speaks about his parents and the role that they played in having him to be who he is today. And that's what we want for parents. We will provide the support and the help to them to ensure that they provide this kind of loving environment for the children to grow in, so that when they grow, they can make the correct decisions. So, and going back to again, children need to have the information so that they can make the appropriate decisions and correct decisions for in situation that affects them. So it was very good to be on the panel this evening. A lot of questions, seeing that the interest is there, so it means that we have a lot of work to do in the child protection sector to get the information out so that people know how to protect. We have a campaign coming up, Good Parenting campaign, also linking that to the ban on corporal punishment, and we hope to use this to get information also that parents and children and families can make appropriate decisions for themselves. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Gage-Grey, and continue the excellent work. I'm going to call Mr. DeShaun Bradford, Deputy Head Boy, Campion College, to give the vote of thanks.
Good evening, all attendees and distinguished guests. I am DeShaun Bradford, the Deputy Head Boy of Campion College, and it is my pleasure to move the vote of thanks for this evening's forum. As Nelson Mandela amazingly put it, there can be no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which it treats its children. From the very passionate presentations from our panelists, it is very evident that they too share the same sentiment. To our panelists, Mrs. Ann Blaine, Dr. Karen Carpenter, Mrs. Rosalee Gage-Grey, and DPP Paula Llewellyn, CD and QC, I would like to say my most sincere thanks for such remarkable presentations. Today, you all made us reflect on the fact that justice for children is a battle that needs to be constantly fought. It can never stop if you truly want to protect our children's minds and bodies from all that seek to harm them in this society. Ms. Ann Blaine, you provide us valuable insight and help provide data to illustrate the push and pull factors creating the missing children issues in Jamaica. You outlined your work in the many organizations such as the Hear the Children's Cry that provide essential information on missing children in our country. You explained how your 12-year statistics has significant implications in policy development and research in child protection in Jamaica. Through these reports, you highlight how you can better protect runaway children from their most vulnerable and abusive backgrounds. As you profoundly said, children who live in happy homes do not run away. When we fix families, we fix Jamaica. And how could we forget the radical words of Dr. Karen Carpenter, as she challenged us to think of ways to break the cycle of abuse through various social measures that would involve all members in our society by normalizing sexual development, assessing the psychological status of perpetrators and victims, and treat them accordingly with rehabilitation. As she rightly put it, we are incarcerating illnesses and not treating them. She also highlighted the importance of evaluating of progress and of source systems to make them better. Mrs. Rosalee Gage-Grey, you educated us on the resources available to parents and students who are impacted by abuse by explaining the Child Protection Act and outlining the rights of children in our society. The duty of adults to report cases of child abuse. You also highlight the role of the CPFSA in improving the welfare of children and the other various organizations in Jamaica dedicated to the psychosocial health of families who are constantly assessing and improving their responses. You also highlighted the emergence of a 211 hotline that can be used by children to report abuse. And thanks to DPP Paula Llewellyn for reiterating the importance of parent supervision and good family structures. You outlined the various factors that contribute to abuse of children, such as poor supervision, hypersexualization of children, adultification, and the general cycles of assault, and the non-reporting culture, which you term as an association of criminality. Through your presentation, you called on all members of the community to act against assault. You urged for parents to be more vigilant and responsible with their children, especially when entrusting them in the care of others, as we have often plagued with distressing news of the demise of children, which many times could be prevented. You reiterated the importance of family planning in reducing child abuse, as the more children brought into dysfunctional families, the more children that will be neglected. But this event would be meaningless without the constant engagement of our audience, and therefore to all attendees, I sincerely thank you for your exuberant participation and thought-provoking questions. Thank you, Professor Aldrie Henry Lee, for being such an excellent moderator, as well as working alongside with the team at SALISES at the University of the West Indies to organize this very important event. In closing, I would like to echo the words of Shakespeare. I can no other answer make, but thanks and thanks and ever thanks. Good evening, everyone, and I hope that you all stay safe.
Oh, excellent. I tell you, these young people give us so much hope. And it's always good to end with the young people, reminding us that there's so much promise in our children. So today we had an excellent forum. We had the common themes of child poverty, we had cultural hindrances, and we underscored the importance of the family. And if the family is in crisis, nothing good comes out of the society. But Child Month ends today. But every day, let me remind you that every day is Child's Day. Every month is Children's Month. And it begins with each and every single one of us to take care of our nation's children. I want to thank you. Thank you to SALISES team. They know themselves. And thank you, each and every one of us. Let us leave here with a resolution that we will try our very best to protect the nation's children. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen and children. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.